The knock came at 2 a.m., three soft raps like someone apologizing to the door, and when I opened it, Nora Hart was standing on my porch in a raincoat over pajamas, holding a flash drive like it was lit, and she said, "She sent me, but I came here for myself." Then she stepped past me into my living room, pulled the curtain shut with two fingers, and added the sentence that ended 2 years of my life being a lie. "Cole, Camille never left you. She was taken, and you have until Friday at 4 o'clock to help me prove it. Let me give you the 2 years and 30 seconds, because you need the wound before you can understand the surgery." 2 years ago, I was engaged to Camille Hart. I ran my family's boatyard, Bennett Boatworks, third generation, the last working slip on a waterfront that developers circle like gulls, and I was happy in the specific, stupid way of a man who thinks the worst thing that can happen to him is a bad hull season. Then, over one September week, my life was demolished in the correct order, the way professionals demolish things. First, a lawsuit landed on the yard, a client claiming I'd falsified a survey on a boat that later sank, sworn statements and all. Then, while I was drowning in that, Camille received an envelope. Photos, me, and a woman, a hotel lobby, timestamps. I have never in my life been in that lobby. It did not matter. The photos were good, the lawsuit made me look like a liar professionally, and the combination made me look like a liar entirely. Camille wouldn't take my calls. 6 weeks later, she was dating Pierce Whitlock. Whitlock Development, the man buying up our waterfront, her boss's biggest client, the kind of man whose smile has a lobby in it. The lawsuit settled for everything I had except the yard itself. And this Saturday, 4 days from the knock, Camille Hart is supposed to marry him. I had made my peace with all of it, the way you make peace with weather, and now her little sister was standing in my living room at 2 a.m., soaked, shaking, holding a flash drive. "Say the first part again," I said. "Camille found something," Nora said. 10 days ago, in Pierce's study safe, she went in for her passport for the honeymoon paperwork, and the passport was sitting on top of a file with your name on it, Cole. She photographed everything and put it back, and she has been smiling at that man across the dinner table for 10 days like a hostage negotiating her own release. She can't come here, he has a driver named Danes who drives her everywhere, and her phone's on his family plan, and family plans share locations. But nobody watches me. I'm just the little sister who walks her dog at weird hours. She held out the drive. Her hand was not steady. She sent me with this. "And the second part?" I said. "You came here for yourself." "What does that mean, Nora?" And Nora Hart, who I'd known since she was 19, who used to fall asleep on our couch during movie nights, who had, I would learn by Friday, been carrying a piece of shrapnel from the same explosion that hit me, looked at the floor, then made herself look at me instead, and said, "That's day 3 material. You're going to hate me before you forgive me, and I need you fighting before you hate me. So plug in the drive. Stay with me." Because what was on that drive was only the first layer. There were 4, and the last one wasn't about Camille at all. It was about the woman standing in my living room, and the 2 a.m. knock that was 2 years later than it should have been, and exactly on time. We put the drive in my laptop at my kitchen table, and I met the file with my name on it. Bennett, a real folder, tabbed, organized, the file of a man who documents his own crimes because he's never once imagined consequences. And the first thing it held was my hotel lobby, not just the photos Camille got, the originals, and their receipts, an invoice from G. Malloy Investigations, line itemed like a plumber's bill, surveillance, subject C. Bennett, 14 hours, composite imaging services, rush delivery, composite imaging services. That's the professional term, apparently, for building a hotel lobby around a man who was never in it. Behind that, a statement draft for the lawsuit, the client who claimed I falsified his survey, with tracked changes, edits in the margin, and the edits were in Pierce Whitlock's own account name. He hadn't just funded my demolition, he'd line-edited it. One margin note, on the paragraph where the client swore I'd pressured him to skip a hull inspection, read, "And I will hear this in my sleep until I die. Too soft. Make him sound confident. Liars are confident." There was a schedule, an actual schedule, with the lawsuit and the photos on the same September week, sequenced. Item 1, credibility. Item 2, the girl. I am quoting a real document. Item 2 of my life was the girl. And beneath all of it, oldest date in the folder, a one-page memo from a land use consultant. written before Pierce and Camille had ever officially met. Assessing Heart Point. Acquisition options. Trust structure. Obstacles. Under obstacles, 2 entries. The ground lease and a name. C. Bennett. Relationship UA. Trustees presumptive heir. Recommend resolution. Recommend resolution. I was a line item 8 months before I was a heartbreak. The photos weren't jealousy and the lawsuit wasn't business. They were site preparation. I sat back and stared at the ceiling and did the thing you do when 2 years of grief converts to 2 years of theft in one sitting. I laughed. One ugly note, because the body has to put the pressure somewhere. Nora put her hand flat on the table next to mine. Not on mine. Next to it. I'd understand that inch by Friday too. Then her phone alarm went off, soft, and she checked it and went pale practical. Danes drives Pierce's morning route at 5:40. It passes the end of your road. This town has 4 roads, Cole. It's not paranoia, it's geometry. I have 20 minutes to not exist here. So ask fast. Why now? I said. Why does Camille need this out before Friday at 4? What's Friday at 4? The prenup signing, Nora said. Ruth Vance's office. Camille's own lawyer talked her into having independent counsel. It's the one meeting Pierce couldn't refuse without looking like what he is. Cole, the prenup packet is on the drive too. Look at Schedule C. I looked at Schedule C, and that's when the file stopped being about my past and became about everyone's future, because listed among the assets Camille would be bringing into the marriage, wrapped in trust language smooth as poured concrete, was Heart Point. 11 waterfront acres her grandfather left the sisters, held in a family trust, Camille trustee. The land between Whitlock Development's 2 biggest parcels. The land my boatyard sits on the edge of, on a 99-year ground lease from the Hart family that developers had tried and failed to break for a decade. The prenup didn't share Heart Point. It restructured it. New trustee upon marriage. The couple, jointly, with tie-breaking authority to the spouse with commercial real estate expertise. He's not marrying her, I said slowly. He's closing on her. Now you see it, Nora said. The wedding's the acquisition. The photos were the demolition permit. You were the structure in the way. She looked at me across my grandfather's kitchen table, on my grandfather's ground lease, on Heartland, and said the line I'd carve above the yard's door if the zoning allowed. Pierce Whitlock doesn't propose, Cole. He forecloses. Then her alarm chirped its 2-minute warning, and she was up and into her coat in one motion, all business, and stopped at my door with her hand on the knob. Copy everything to 3 places before sunrise. Camille risked her whole escape to get that drive out of that house. Don't make it have been for a passport. She was down the steps and into the dark, a woman visibly walking a dog in her own neighborhood by 5:38, and I stood at my window watching the road, and at 5:41 exactly a black SUV rolled past the end of it, unhurried, and I understood for the first time that the clock on this thing didn't tick. It drove. I didn't sleep. At 6 I called the yard's old attorney. By 8 I'd learned what "you have copies of stolen photographs of forged photographs" is worth on its own. An opening, not a verdict. Provenance, she said. Get the man who made them. G. Malloy Investigations, per the State License Board, was one Gus Malloy, 71. License lapsed. Last known address a marina houseboat 2 towns south. Because God is occasionally a screenwriter. Nora insisted on coming. I walk dogs at weird hours, she said. I'm invisible. You're a headline. She wasn't wrong. By 9 a.m., I'd already gotten the day's first screen intrusion. A text from a number I hadn't seen in 2 years. Pierce Whitlock. Breezy as a brochure. Cole. Long time. Doing a goodwill review of legacy leases on the point before the family structure updates. Let's get you certainty. Buyout paperwork's drawn up, very generous window, expires Friday. Life moves on. Even boats. PW. The lease he'd failed to break for 10 years, he was now offering to buy. Because, as of Saturday, he'd owned the tiebreak on the trust that held it, and we'd both know what a lease is worth when your landlord line edits lawsuits. The message wasn't an offer, it was a countdown, wearing an offer's clothes. Gus Malloy answered his houseboat door with a coffee, and the eyes of a man doing arithmetic, and when I said my name, friends, he didn't ask which Bennett. He winced. That wince was the first apology anyone had given me in 2 years. I figured one of you'd find me eventually, he said, and let us in. The houseboat was neat as a chandlery, 40 years of a careful man's habits, and he cleared 2 chairs, poured coffee nobody drank, and told it straight, because 71-year-old men on houseboats are done editing themselves. Pierce had hired him for surveillance. Legal, standard, half his living for 4 decades. 14 hours of me being boring. You want to know what 14 hours of you looks like, son? You sanded a transom, you ate a sandwich standing up, and you called your girl on a lunch break and laughed at something for a full minute. I wrote that down. Subject laughed 1 minute. That's the man I helped bury. He looked at his coffee. Then he asks for composites. Says it's for a prank, a bachelor thing. A prank. Gus laughed at his own ceiling. 40 years licensed and I needed the money, and I told myself a lie the size of a mortgage payment. Then I saw your engagement announcement disappear from the paper, and I knew what I'd built. Why keep anything? Nora asked quietly. If you knew what it was, why not burn it all and forget? Because men like me don't get to forget, sweetheart, Gus said. We get to document. It's the only apology the trade knows how to make. He went to a cabinet. The man kept files the way I keep engine parts, in oiled rows, and pulled a folder, then a second folder, then a little dictation recorder, in a zip bag dated in marker. Here's the part your lawyer's going to want. He never paid the last invoice. Stiffed me $4,000, out of pure sport, because paying the little people in full is a habit and he doesn't own it. So I kept everything, son. The raw frames with the real timestamps. You were at the yard, there's boat GPS in the corner of 2 shots, your own travel lift and frame with the hour meter readable. The compositing order, in writing, from his account, and a voicemail, he tapped the zip bag, telling me to, quote, age the files and lose the originals. I aged the files. The originals declined to be lost. He pushed all of it across the table. Mr. Malloy, I said, you understand where this goes. With lawyers, probably the state bar, maybe the AG. Your name rides with it, in daylight. Gus Malloy looked out his galley window at the water for a moment. Son, I'm 71. I live on a boat and I owe nobody. And I built a lie that cost 2 kids 2 years. I'm too old to be a coward twice. What do you need? Affidavit? Deposition? Say it slower and I'll say it under oath. And when you get him in a room, the old man's jaw set. Tell him Gus says the invoice is now $4,000 plus interest. On the drive home, Nora was quiet in a loaded way, watching the water, and finally said, 2 down. The photos and the lawsuit, you realize what's left. I said the prenup. She said no. What's left is how the photos got to Camille, and she went silent again, and I let her, because I am, on my best days, exactly smart enough to know when a confession is composing itself in the passenger seat. It didn't get finished composing because Wednesday arrived swinging. Pierce Whitlock did not become the waterfront's apex predator by waiting out clocks. He pressures every joint at once and watches which one cries. At 10 a.m., the call, Fernwood Grove, the memory care residence where Grace Hart, Camille and Nora's mother, has lived for 3 years. Billing, apologetic, the account's sponsoring guarantor had paused payment, pending family restructuring, and could the family please resolve the balance within 30 days. The guarantor was Whitlock Development. He'd been paying for their mother's care for a year and a half. Nora had thought it was love. It was collateral. And now, 72 hours before the prenup, the invoice had teeth. Nora stood in my kitchen holding the phone with both hands, and I watched her go from scared to something colder, and she said, he's not even hiding it. He's telling us the price of the truth is Mom's bed. At noon, the second joint. My insurance carrier called. An anonymous complaint about survey practices at the yard had been forwarded to the state licensing board. 2 years dormant, revived in a morning. My agent, a good man who's insured Bennett Hulls since my father ran the slip, read me the complaint's language over the phone, and then paused and said, Cole, off the record? This reads like a lawyer wrote it. Anonymous complaints don't have defined terms. I told him to send me every word of it, time-stamped, and to have a nice day, and I added it to the box, because by Wednesday I had stopped experiencing Pierce's attacks as attacks. Every joint he pressured was another exhibit volunteering itself. The man was carpet-bombing us with evidence of coordination and calling it leverage, and at 4, the third, the one aimed at Camille, Nora's phone buzzed with a family plan notification. Danes had driven Camille's phone to the airport and back. A dry run, or a message, I can move her anywhere, anytime, and her location will read like errands. That night Camille got word out the only channel they had left, a note folded into a cookbook Nora borrowed, in the sister's childhood pencil code. But before the cookbook there was Fernwood, and I need to give you Fernwood, because it's where I stopped fighting for the past and started fighting for the future. Nora had to see the billing office in person, and she asked me to come, which was its own quiet event, because until Wednesday she'd been keeping me a compartment. Grace Hart was in the sunroom, silver-haired and straight-backed, working a jigsaw of a harbor, and when she looked up at me her face did the flickering thing that broke your heart on a schedule. No name, but a warmth, an old file half-opening. "You're the boat one," she said finally, delighted with herself. "Camille's boat one. You two bring me those little lemon things." 2 years gone, and I was still filed under Camille, still filed under lemon cookies. In the one archive in this whole story Pierce couldn't edit. Nora's hand found my sleeve and gripped it, hard, and neither of us corrected her mother, because some ledgers you let stand. We were 20 minutes into the jigsaw when the sunroom's front window filled with black SUV, Danes, not coming in, worse. He parked where the glass would hold him, got out, leaned on the hood, and made a slow phone call while looking at the building, at us, at the exact room we sat in, the way a surveyor looks at a lot. Delivering the message without a word, "I know where your mother's window is." Nora didn't flinch. She picked up a puzzle piece, fit it, a boat, obviously a boat, kissed her mother's temple, and said, "Lo, to me. Take a good look at that man, Cole. Friday, everyone he works for goes in a box, and he drives a rideshare by spring." Then she waved at Danes through the glass, cheerful as a parade, and I watched a professional intimidator become slightly unsure what he had just witnessed, and I thought, these sisters, God help Pierce Whitlock. He'd spent 2 years studying their assets and never once inventoried their spines. The cookbook came home with us that evening, and decoded on my table Camille's pencil said, "He suspects nothing or everything, same face. Friday is still on. Whatever you're building, it walks into Ruth's office at 4, or it's too late. After Saturday, he doesn't need my signature for anything ever again. And N. Tell him, all of it, including yours. That's an order from your big sister. C." Nora read that last line and set the paper down and walked out to my porch, and I gave it a minute, because I'd finally decoded something else in that pencil note, the part addressed to her. "Tell him, all of it, including yours." Camille, inside a watched house, 72 hours from ambushing her own wedding, had spent ink on her little sister's unfinished business. That's the Hart sisters, friends. Under siege, they cover each other's exits. So I gave it a minute, and then I followed. And on that porch, over the same railing where she'd knocked at 2 a.m., the third layer came off. "The envelope," she said. "The photos of you, 2 years ago. Camille didn't get them in the mail, Cole. I gave them to her." She made herself keep going, voice level as a keel. "Pierce came to me first, before he ever officially met her. He took me to lunch, the little sister, the soft target. And he was so concerned. Said his security consultant flagged you during due diligence on the waterfront, said he hated to be the messenger, said Camille would take it better from family, and I looked at those photos and I was 23, and they were professional and her voice cracked once, 1 degree. I believed them. I put them in her hands, Cole, her sister, the one source she'd never doubt. That was his real design. The photos were only ammunition. I was the gun." She finally looked at me. And then, 8 months ago, he mentioned that lunch, casually, at a family dinner, in front of Mom. Just placed it on the table between us so I'd understand. If I ever got ideas, he'd tell Camille where her proof came from, and I'd lose the only person I have left. He made me the crime, and then charged me rent on it. "Why come at all then?" I asked. "The 2 a.m. knock. She sent you, but you said it that first night. You came here for yourself. Say the rest." Nora Hart looked at me the way you look at deep water before you jump, and said, "I delivered the lie. I get to deliver the truth. That's for me. And the other part," she stopped, started again, and left it in the harbor between us. "The other part's for after Friday. If you're still speaking to me after Friday, ask me again why I couldn't sleep for 2 years. I was still speaking to her. I want the record to show I was barely breathing, but I was still speaking to her. Thursday we built the machine, because feelings don't sign affidavits. My attorney, a woman who had watched me lose everything 2 years ago on paper she always said smelled wrong, spread the whole harvest across her conference table and went quiet for a long time. the specific quiet of a professional recalibrating history, and then said, "Cole, 2 years ago, I told you we couldn't win because their story was load-bearing." It was. He built it out of structural steel. She picked up Gus's raw frames, the tracked changes draft, the memo with recommend resolution on it. This is the demolition survey of his own building, in his own handwriting. I've been doing this 26 years, and I've never seen a man archive himself like this. She looked up. By 4 o'clock tomorrow, he's going to wish he'd paid the $4,000. By nightfall, we had the machine assembled. Gus's sworn statement plus the raw frames, boat GPS in frame, real timestamps, plus the compositing order and the lose the originals voicemail. The track changes lawsuit draft tying Pierce's account to the sworn statement that sank me, which my attorney called with reverence a perjury suborning selfie. The land use memo proving I was a line item before I was a heartbreak. Fernwood's guarantor file showing care payments weaponized the same week as the prenup. Leverage, timestamped. The airport dry run location log, and Schedule C itself, with a trust attorney's overnight letter opining that its trustee swap language was, quote, a conveyance dressed as a marriage. And at 9 p.m., right on schedule, the screen intrusion, aimed this time at Nora, because Pierce pressure tests every joint, and Wednesday's parade wave had registered somewhere in that reptile file system of his. Her phone lit up at my kitchen table. N. Danes mentioned you visited Grace today. Sweet, she seems comfortable there, doesn't she? Comfort is so administrative, though. Anyway, big weekend. Tell your sister cold feet are expensive. See you at the rehearsal. P. Nora read it out loud, flat, and then set the phone face down and looked at me, and said, 8 months, that tone. 8 months of sentences with a trapdoor in the middle. Tomorrow at 4, Cole, I want to watch his face when the floor opens under him, and I want to be standing close enough to see the exact second he understands the little sister built the hinge. One hole remained. Everything proved forgery and pressure. Nothing yet proved Pierce's mouth. Paper he could lawyer. He'd blame Gus, blame Zeal, blame staff. We needed him narrating, so we used the one thing he'd never once respected. Me. Beaten. I texted him back on the buyout. Fine. You win, but I want to hear terms from you, not paper. The yard, 8 a.m. Friday. Alone. His reply took 90 seconds. Attaboy, 8 sharp, bring the lease. One-party consent state. Friends? I checked twice. Then I charged 2 recorders and didn't sleep for the second time that week. He arrived at 8:01 in a coat that cost more than my travel lift, walked my family's dock like a man inspecting a purchase, ran a gloved finger along a piling, and checked it like the harbor owed him housekeeping and, because winners monologue, it's the tax on their kind of winning, gave me everything. On tape. I'd worried, at 3 a.m., about how to draw him out. I needn't have. All I had to do was stand there looking beaten, which after 2 years I could do from muscle memory, and hold the buyout folder like it was heavy, and say, I just want to know one thing before I sign. Man to man. September. Was any of it real? And Pierce Whitlock smiled the lobby smile and relaxed, because a beaten man asking for closure is, to his species, the sound of a deal clearing, and leaned on my grandfather's piling and gave me 11 minutes. No hard feelings on the September stuff, Cole. It wasn't personal. You were an encumbrance on 11 acres. The photos, the lawsuit, think of it as eminent domain, privately administered. He smiled at my water. And honestly, efficient. Do you know what a contested waterfront assemblage costs in this state? Years. Lawyers, referendums, God forbid. You cost me 11 grand in a September. He named the schedule, credibility first, then the girl. Always credibility first, because heartbreak with a ruined man's face on it self-certifies. He complimented Gus's composites without naming Gus. Good vendor, bit precious about invoices. He even complimented the delivery, and the sister handled distribution beautifully. Family's the only courier nobody screens. He explained, patiently, like a man mentoring me in my own destruction, that Camille had never had a choice because people don't leave a story that explains their pain, Cole. They marry it. And at the end, my favorite 30 seconds of audio ever recorded on this coastline. He clapped my shoulder. Sign the buyout. Keep this week polite. And Grace Hart's bed stays paid. There's the whole deal, Skipper. Every relationship is a closing. I just read the documents first. I stood there with 2 recorders running under my jacket and 1 spare in the bait bucket 6 feet away, and the hardest work I have ever done at that boatyard, and I have single-handedly stepped a mast in a crosswind, was not smiling. Yeah, I said. About that, me too now. He didn't catch it. Men like Pierce never catch it. They're too busy watching for their own reflection in you. He drove off to his prenup day, waving out the window like we were friends. Like the harbor was already his, and I stood on my dock with 11 minutes of him in my pocket, and, I'll admit it, saluted the water. At 3:40 we walked into Ruth Vance's office. Me, Nora, Gus Malloy in his funeral and court suit, my attorney with the banker's box. At 3:55, Camille arrived with Danes shadowing her to the lobby, where Ruth's very large paralegal informed him the conference room was attorney-client only. And at 4 o'clock exactly, Pierce Whitlock swept in with his lawyer and his fountain pen, saw the room, saw Gus, saw me, and performed the only honest expression I ever witnessed on his face. It lasted half a second. It was worth 2 years. "What is this?" his lawyer said. "Independent counsel," Ruth Vance said pleasantly. "Independently counseling." "But Ruth, before my client signs, we'll be reviewing some documents material to the agreement. Exhibit 1 is audio. Mr. Whitlock, you may want to sit. It's your voice, and it runs 11 minutes. She played all 11. An encumbrance, on 11 acres. Eminent domain, privately administered. Family's the only courier nobody screens. Grace Hart's bed stays paid. Camille sat perfectly still through the whole thing, spine straight, hands folded, 2 years of doubt getting refunded at par, and when it ended she looked first. I'll never forget the order. Not at Pierce, not at me. At Nora. And Nora, who could have stayed in the wake of it, stood up at the conference table and said, "Before anything else, the photos came from my hands, Cam. He aimed me and I fired. I've been his hostage about it for 8 months, and your courier for 10 days, and whatever you need to say to me, say it. But say it after we finish him, because we have him, and I helped build the have." Camille Hart looked at her little sister for a long moment. Then she said, "You knocked on the right door at 2 a.m. We're even. Sit down, we're busy," and turned to Pierce and slid the prenup back across the table, unsigned, with one finger, like scraping something off a plate. "I don't sign lies twice," she said. "The wedding's off, Pierce. The reckoning isn't." To his credit as an organism, he tried. He tried charm. "Camille, whatever's been manufactured here." And Ruth said, "Manufactured. Excellent word. Exhibit 2. Compositing invoices." He tried lawyer. His attorney requested everything in writing, and Ruth handed him the banker's box index, Malloy affidavit, raw frames, GPS metadata, the track changes perjury draft, the land use memo with recommend resolution highlighted, the Fernwood guarantor timeline, the airport log, and cover letters already delivered that morning to the State Bar, the AG's Consumer Fraud Division, and, the one that made his lawyer put down his own pen, Whitlock Development's construction lender, whose loan covenants, Ruth noted, take an interest in officers under fraud referral. He tried outrage, half rose, buttoned his jacket, announced this was an ambush by a bitter contractor and a confused old man, and Gus Malloy, from the end of the table in his funeral and court suit, said mildly, "Confused. That's on the tape too, Mr. Whitlock. Bit precious about invoices. Speaking of which," and he slid a single sheet down the polished table, an invoice, dated that morning. Balance due, services 2 years prior, $4,000. Interest, see Exhibits A through K. I watched Pierce Whitlock read a bill from the man he'd stiffed for sport, and I want you to know that of everything in that room, that was the paper his hands weren't steady on. He tried the mother last. Grace's care arrangements are, of course, being reviewed, and that's when I put the yard's checkbook on the table and said, "Paid through the year as of 9 this morning. Bennett Boatworks sponsors now. We had a good week." And Nora added sweetly, "You're off the guarantor form, Pierce. We kept a copy, though, for the exhibits." He stood at the door. They always stop at the door, and reached for a last word, and Camille didn't even look up from the documents she was initialing to remove him as anything from anything. "Pierce, you forged the photos, the lawsuit, the file, the whole story of 2 people's lives." Now she looked up. "The one signature you needed today was real, and you couldn't get it. Close the door on your way out of the family. Saturday. The venue's cancellation fee was paid." Gleefully, Camille said, "from her own account." Within a month, the AG's office had Gus on record. My old settlement was reopened for fraud on the court, The licensing complaint evaporated with a one-line withdrawal, and Whitlock Development's lender called its covenants, which is a phrase that means the gulls found a bigger gull. Danes, for the record, drives a rideshare now. Nora checks the app sometimes purely for morale, and swears she'll 5-star him if he ever picks her up. For the poetry. Gus Malloy got his $4,000 plus interest, paid by Camille personally, hand-delivered to the houseboat with a tin of the lemon things, and he keeps the paid invoice framed in his galley next to his reinstated license, and every few weeks he puts up the coast and ties off at my dock, and inspects my transoms, and tells me I sand like a man with something to prove, which is his way of saying he sleeps fine now. Grace Hart's bills come to the boatyard, where they are paid the day they arrive, forever, and on Sundays we do the harbor jigsaw, and she still calls me the boat one, and some weeks she calls me Nora's boat one, and the first time that happened, Nora had to leave the sunroom for a minute and I pretended not to know why. Hart Point stays Hart. The ground lease got renewed, 99 more years, Camille as trustee, $1 consideration, and, handwritten in the margin in her own pen, consideration also includes 2 years with interest, which leaves the fourth layer, the porch. Ask me again after Friday. I asked her the following 2 a.m., fair's fair, by knocking on her door, 3 soft raps like an apology, and Nora Hart opened it already smiling like she'd heard my truck 3 streets away, and I said, "Why couldn't you sleep for 2 years?" "Because I put the photos in her hands," she said, "and some of why it wrecked me was guilt." She stepped out onto the step, closing the distance the way you close a file. And some of it wasn't, Cole. Some of it was that I'd handed my sister the lie that took you out of my Tuesdays too. The movie nights. The doc. You. I grieved a man who wasn't mine to grieve, and I did it quietly. For 2 years. Which is the hardest thing I've ever done. Including Friday. She looked up at me. Chin set, scared, and doing it anyway. The whole Hart inheritance in one face. She sent me. That first night. That part was true. But I came for myself. That part was truer. So, here's me, knocking. "It's technically my knock," I said. "I'm at your door." "Then get in here," said Nora Hart, "before you're on camera," and pulled me over the threshold by the jacket, laughing, and that, 2 years, 3 demolitions, 11 acres, and 11 minutes of tape later, is the exact moment the wreck finished getting salvaged. Camille found out the way big sisters find out everything. First, silently, and with a text that just said, "Finally, she's loved you since the couch, idiot. Sunday dinner. Bring the boat." We brought the boat. We bring it every Sunday now. Up the channel past 11 acres that will stay green and salt-bitten and Hart for 99 more years. Past the yard where a 3rd-generation sign is getting a 4th coat of paint. To a dock where a big sister who negotiated her own release stands waiting with her mother's jigsaw under one arm, counting us in like harbor traffic. 2 years, somebody stole from us. This part, nobody touches. So now it's your turn, down in the comments, because this story is only worth telling if it opens some doors that aren't mine. If you found out tonight that your worst heartbreak was engineered, designed, invoiced, and delivered by someone who profited from it, would you want the truth, even 2 years too late, knowing it would reopen everything to fix anything? And here's the harder one. Have you ever carried a truth that could have saved someone you love and stayed silent because speaking it would cost you them? Tell me how long you've carried it, and what it would take for you to knock on that door at 2 a.m. Somebody reading this thread has their coat on right now. Maybe your comment is the push. If this one hit the way a knock at 2 a.m. hits, subscribe and ring the bell. Because next week I'm telling you what the AG's investigators found in Pierce Whitlock's other safe. 17 files, 17 names, and one of them was the investigators. Knock late, tell the truth. All of it, including yours.